let's begin now. I hope everyone's enjoying their night, and here is our first passage. So, oh, nope, that's not our first passage. Really? Alright, so this is our first passage. So, we are reading Chapter 3 of General Grant's memoir. It is Vicksburg. And let's read together. Chalon was unquestionably a Union victory, but because Grant's exhausted forces failed to pursue the retreating enemy aggressively enough. Welcome, Yongshi 123. I'm glad you could join us tonight. No specific reason, Wang Xing. We're just starting the reading now, so. Alright. Failed to pursue the retreating. Chalon remained an unexploited victory. Those among Grant's equals and superiors who were inclined to be critical of him harped on this and the fact that Grant had allowed himself to be surprised by the enemy. But Abraham Lincoln, welcome MG38B, welcome Beckford Wong. Glad you guys could join us tonight. And ultimately successful, Grant had fought. Welcome Barlow to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Welcome Amy Chang. I'm glad you could join us. Hello back. Alright. Excessively cautions conduct of the campaign that Union General George McClellan was then mounting on the Virginia Peninsula. I can't spare this man, said Lincoln of Grant. He fights, and certainly the fact that McClellan's peninsular campaign soon turned into a debacle did nothing to change Lincoln's opinion of this rising star in his western armies. Lincoln's support had no doubt helped Grant, but it did not altogether save him from his critics. Thank you, MG38B, and welcome Carrie Lee. I'm glad you could join us tonight. And to anyone on YouTube, I welcome you to the live stream. After Chalon, welcome 818. I'm glad you could join us. After Chalon, Halleck assumed direct field command of the Western armies, in effect kicking Grant upstairs by giving him a more or less ceremonial posting as second in command. By April 29, 1862, Halleck was ready to move to Corinth. Incredibly, it took him until May 25th to get there, and then, instead of attacking the city, he besieged it. So I am reading the text below, and I want everyone in the other side to either read along or follow. So I'm reading this text from Chapter 3 of General Grant's memoir. This is on Vicksburg. So I am reading the book, and then after this chapter, I'll explain a little bit about the Battle of Vicksburg. And we'll look at the pictures in this section together. Welcome Flora and everyone else to the reading. I'm glad you could join us. Incredibly, it took him until May 25th to get there, and then, instead of attacking the city, he besieged it. Of this period, Grant wrote, "For myself, I was little more than an observer. My position was so embarrassing, in fact, that I made several attempts, welcome Tom and everyone else, applications during the siege to be relieved. PTG Beauregard, welcome Nelson Mandela, who commanded the Confederate forces in Corinth, could see no point in allowing himself to be starved into submission, and on the night of May 29th, 30th, he evacuated the city. Halleck did not pursue him. The possession of Corinth by national troops was of strategic importance, wrote Grant, but the victory was barren in every other particular. Nevertheless, thank you for the donation. On July 11th, a grateful Washington recalled Halleck to the capital to make him general-in-chief of the Union armies. His departure ended Grant's purgatory, leaving him de facto commander of the District of Tennessee. The Union armies that Halleck had concentrated around Corinth. I'm going to post a translation of these pages after the live stream. Watch for them in the moments. Halleck had concentrated around Corinth, begun to disperse soon after his departure for Washington. Welcome Winka and welcome everyone else to the live stream. Welcome Jeremy Fatum. And Confederate forces according to begin a gathering for reconquest of Corinth and southern Tennessee. The assault on Corinth, led by Confederate General Earl Van Dorn, began on October 3rd. A fierce two-day battle followed, but Grant's troops eventually routed the attackers. The battle, said Grant, relieved me of any further anxiety for the safety of the territory within my jurisdiction, and soon after receiving reinforcements, I suggested to General-in-Chief a forward movement against Vicksburg. Halleck appointed the proposal, the Confederate fortress city of Vicksburg, Mississippi. This is General Grant's memoir, and this is the third chapter. We are reading the section on Vicksburg. The Confederate fortress city of Vicksburg, Mississippi, was indeed now the key to the Union victory in the West, and perhaps, and perhaps the East as well. Union grand strategy was, Union grand strategy was heavily predicted on gaining control of the entire Mississippi River, thus bisecting the Greater South along the north-south axis. I will post a translation after the live stream so you guys can understand the reading better. This is a little bit tougher, so let's see. Old South along the east-west axis, most likely via a drive east through Georgia to the sea. By the autumn, welcome back Nelson, welcome plus plus, and welcome Beck for Wong. By the autumn of 1862, eventually federal conquest of the Mississippi had become a real possibility, ever since April when U.S. Admiral David Farragut had captured New Orleans. Union land and naval forces along the river had gradually extended the area under their control until Confederate holdings were effectively reduced to that stretch of the left bank that lay between Port Hudson, Louisiana, and Vicksburg. Yet Vicksburg would prove to be singularly tough nut to crack, as Grant's memoirs made it all too clear. Welcome Carlson, EOC. Alright. Glad you could join us tonight. Vicksburg was important to the enemy because it occupied the first high ground coming close to the river, below Memphis. From there, a railroad runs east, connecting with other roads leading to all points of the southern states. A railroad also starts from the opposite side of the river, extending west as far as Shiverport, Louisiana. Vicksburg was the only channel at the time of the events which in this chapter treats correcting the parts of the Confederacy divided by the Mississippi. So long as it was held by the enemy, the free navigation of the river was prevented, hence its importance. Points to the river between Vicksburg and Port Hudson were held as dependencies, but their fall was sure to follow the capture of the former place. The campaign against Vicksburg commenced on the 2nd of November, as indicated in the dispatch to the General-in-Chief in the following words: I have commenced a movement on grand jurisdiction with 3 districts from Corinth and 2 from Bolivar. Will leave from here tomorrow to take in person of found principally. I will go to Holly Spring. Welcome, keep moving. I'm glad you could join us tonight. If found principally, I will go to Holy Springs, and maybe Granada, completing railroad and telegraph as I go. At this time, my command was holding the Mobile and Ohio railroads from about 25 miles south of Corinth, north to Columbus, Kentucky, the Mississippi Central from the Bolivar north to its jurisdiction with the middle welcome to the live stream. Welcome back, Barlow. And Ohio. The Memphis and Charleston from Corinth east to Bear Creek, and the Mississippi River from Cairo to Memphis. My entire command was no more than was necessary to hold these lines, and hardly that if kept on the defensive. By moving against the enemy and into his unsubdued or not yet captured territory, driving their army before us, these lines would nearly hold themselves, thus affording a large force for field operations. My moving force at the time was about 30,000 men, and I estimated the enemy confronting me under Pemberton at about the same number. General McPherson commanded my left wing, and General C.S. Hamilton the center, while Sherman was at Memphis with the right wing. Hamilton was fortified at the Tallahatchie, but occupied Holly Springs and the Grand Junction on the Mississippi Central Railroad. On the 8th, we occupied Grand Junction at LaGrange. Welcome to the live stream. Throwing a considerable force 7 or 8 miles south, along the river to the railroad. The road from Bolivar followed was repaired and put into running order as the troops advanced. Grant had hoped that the lure of frustrating the deliberate Union advance on Vicksburg might indicate Pemberton to move his forces far enough north of the city so that Sherman could get in behind them and cut them off. But it was not to be. By mid-December, Pemberton had safely withdrawn behind Vicksburg's formidable defenses. Before Sherman could engage him, Grant suffered another, smaller exaction when John A. McClellan, one of his political generals, persuaded his political sponsors in Washington to let him undertake a brief detached campaign against the Confederate Fort Hinderman on the Arkansas River, thus weakening Grant's army at just the time when it was assembling before Vicksburg. But by the end of January 1863, welcome back Plus, Grant had gotten Halleck to order his insubordination McClellan to place himself completely under Grant's authority, and the real work on Vicksburg campaign could begin. From his new headquarters at Young Point, Louisiana, in little upriver from Vicksburg, Grant pondered the difficulties that now lay before him. Welcome V7 to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. See if you can follow along, and we will read together. It was in January the troops took their positions opposite of Vicksburg. The water was very high, and the rains were incessant. There seemed no possibility of land movement before the end of March or later, and it would not do to lie idle all this time. Welcome, Linda. The effect would be demoralizing to the troops, and injuries to their health. Friends in the north would have grown more and more discouraged, and enemies in the same section more and more insolent to their gibes. And denunciation of the case and those engaged in it. Vicksburg, as stated before, is on the first high land coming to the river's edge. Below that in which Memphis stands, the bluff or highland follows the left bank on the Yazoo for some distance and continues in southern direction to the Mississippi River. Welcome, George Chow. Thence it runs the Mississippi to Warrenton, 6 miles below. Bluff and empties into the Mississippi 9 miles above Vicksburg. Vicksburg is built on highland where the Mississippi washes the base of the hill. Hangs Bluff, 11 miles from Vicksburg, on the Yazoo River. Welcome to the live stream. Was strongly fortified. The whole distance from there to Vicksburg, and thence Warrenton, was also entrenched with batteries at suitable distances and rifle connecting them. From young points, the Mississippi turns into northeasterly direction to a point just above the city, when it again turns and runs southwesterly, leaving vessels which might attempt to run the blockade, exposed to the fire of batteries 6 miles below the city. Before there was a range of upper batteries, since the river had made a cut-off, leaving what was the peninsula in front of the city an island. North of Yazoo was all a marsh, heavily timbered, cut up with bayonets, and overflowed. A front attack was therefore impossible, and was never contemplated, certainly not by me. The problem then became how to secure a landing on high ground east of the Mississippi without an apparent retreat. Then commenced a series of experiments to consume time, and to divert the attention of the enemy, of my troops, and the public generally. I myself never felt great confidence that any experiments resorted to what would prove successful. Nevertheless, I was always prepared to take advantage of them in case they did. In 1862, General Thomas Williams had come to New Orleans and cut a ditch 10 or 12 feet wide and about as deep straight across from Young Point to the river below. The distance across was a little over a mile. It was Williams' expectation that when the river rose, it would cut a navigable channel through. But the channel started in a LD from the both sides. Welcome to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Let's see. Any excavation in the way of cutting. Mr. Lincoln had navigated the Mississippi in his younger days and understood well its tendency to change its channel in places from time to time. He sent much store accordingly by this channel. George McClellan had been, therefore, directed before I went to Young's Point to push the work of widening and deepening this canal. Welcome ZJD 15561. I'm glad you could join us tonight. I went to Young's Point to push the working and widening and deepening of the canal. After my arrival, the work was diligently pushed with about 4,000 men, as many as could be used to advance, until interrupted by a sudden rise in the river that broke a dam at the upper end, which had put there to keep the water out until the excavation was completed. This was on the 8th of March. Even if the canal had proven a success, so far as to be navigable for steamers, it could not have been much advantage to us. It runs in a direction almost perpendicular to the line of bluffs on the opposite side, or east bank of the river. As soon as the enemy discovered what we were doing, he established a battery commanding the canal throughout its length. The battery soon drove out our dredges. 2 in number were doing the work of thousands of men. Had the canal been completed, it might have proven of some use in running transports through, under the cover of night to use below, but they would have to run the batteries, though for a much shorter distance. While this work was progressing, we were busy in other directions, trying to find an available landing on the high ground in the east bank of the river, or make waterways to get below the city, avoiding the batteries. Welcome Obaba, welcome Tom, and welcome Miss Rose to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Another expedition that was tried that winter involved trying to open a canal to Lake Providence from which federal gunboats might, by following a somewhat tortuous route through the rivers and bayous, re-enter the Mississippi south of Vicksburg. It was eventually abandoned in favor of the 2 efforts to cut the Yaoshu Delta, first via the so-called Yaoshu Pass route, and then via Steel Bayou route. Both projects failed. By March, when the fan weather campaigning season was at hand, it seemed clear that the only way Admiral David Dixon, Porter's River Run squadron would ever get south of Vicksburg would be by sailing directly under the guns of the city's massive batteries. The risks were appalling, but they had to be faced, for Grant had concluded that the only hope now lay in ferrying his army across the river and attacking Vicksburg from the east, from inside enemy territory. I had contemplation of the whole winter, the movement by land to a point below Vicksburg from which to operate, subject only to the possible but expected success of some one of the expeditions resorted to for the purpose of giving us a different base. This could not be undertaken until the waters receded. I did not, therefore, communicate this plan, even to an officer of my staff, until it was necessary to make preparations for the start. My recollection is that Admiral Porter was the first one to whom I mentioned it. The cooperation of the Navy was absolutely essential in to the success of such an enterprise. I had no more authority to command Porter than he had to command me. It was necessary to have part of the fleet below Vicksburg, and steamers to use ferries were also essential. The Navy was the only escort and protection for those steamers, all of which, in getting below, had run about 14 miles of batteries. Porter fell into place at once. Welcome to the live stream. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Let's see. Suggested that he had better spearhead the preparation of the steamers selected to run the batteries, as sailors would probably understand the work better than soldiers. I was glad to accept his proposal, not only because I admitted to his argument, but because it would enable me to keep from the enemy a little longer our designs. Porter's fleet was on the east side of the river, about the mouth of the Yaoshu, eventually concealed from the enemy by the dense forests they intervened. Even spies. Welcome Carlson, and hello Cherry. I'm glad you could join us tonight. But because it would enable me to keep from the enemy a little longer our designs. Porter's fleet, let's see, even spies could not get near him. on account of the underground and overflowed land, suspicious of some superstitions, movements were aroused. Our fleet, our river guard, discovered one day a small skiff moving quietly and mysteriously up the river. Welcome, BFF. And welcome, Annie J. I'm glad you guys could join us tonight. From the direction of Vicksburg leading to the fleet. On overhauling the boat, they formed a small white flag, not much larger than a handkerchief, set up in the stern, no doubt intended as a flag of truce in case of discovery. The boat, crew, and passengers were brought ashore to me. The chief personage aboard proved to be Jacob Thompson, Secretary of the Interior under the administration of President Buchanan. After a pleasant conversation of half an hour or more, I allowed the boat and crew and passengers and all to return to Vicksburg without creating a suspicion that there was in doubt in my mind as the good faith of Mr. Thompson and his flag. Admiral Porter proceeded with the preparation of the steamers for their hazardous passage of the enemy batteries. The great essential was to protect the boilers from the enemy's shot, and to conceal the fires under the boilers from the view. This he accomplished by loading the steamers between the guards and boilers on the boiler deck on the deck. Wow. Welcome, Arvin White. I'm glad you could join us for tonight's live stream. Above with babes of hail and cotton, all the deck in front of the boilers in the same way, adding stacks of grain, the hay and grain would be wanted below, and cannot be transported in sufficient quantity by the muddy roads, over which we expected to march. Before this, I had been collecting from St. Louis and Chicago yanks and barges to be used in the ferries. By the 16th of April, Porter was ready to start on his perilous trip. The Advance, flagship Benton, Porter commanding, started at 10 o'clock at the night, following the intervals of a few minutes by Lafayette with a captured steamer, the Price, lashing on her side the Louisville, Mount City, Pittsburgh, and Cardinal. All of these naval vessels next came to the transports Forest Queen, Silver Wave, and Henry Clay, each towing barges loaded with coal to be used as fuel. Soon after the battery begun, brought up to the rear. Soon after the start of the battery between Vicksburg and Warren, opened fire across the intervening peninsula, following the upper river batteries all along the line. The gunboats ran up close under the bluffs, delivering the fire in return at all short distances. They were under fire for more than 2 hours, and every vessel was shrunk many times, but with little damage to the gunboats. The transports did not fare so well. The Henry Clay was disabled and deserted by her crew, soon after a shell burst by the cotton packed about the boilers, set the vessel on fire, and burned her to the water's edge. Welcome to the live stream, Siege Down Guzman. Welcome, Pin Chang. And everyone else. And also, is that World of Warcraft or WoW? Because it's amazing. The enemy were evidently expecting our feet, for they were ready to light up the river by means of bonfires on the east side and by firing houses on the point of land opposite the city on the Louisiana side. The sight was magnificent but terrible. I witnessed it from the deck of the river transport run out into the middle of the river as low as was prudent to go. My mind was much relieved when I learned that no one of the transports had been killed and but a few, if any, wounded. During the running of the batteries, men were stationed on the holds of the transports. Welcome back. Let's see. To partially stop with the cotton shot holes that might be made in the hulls. All damage was afterwards soon repaired under the direction of Admiral Porter. Once Porter's squadron was below Vicksburg, Grant sent his army in motion. When Sherman made a demonstration north of Vicksburg, McClellan and McPherson's corps moved south along Louisiana shore, sometimes marching and sometimes ferried in Porter's transports until they reached a point little south of the Confederate stronghold at Grand Gulf. When the troops disembarked the evening of the 29th, it was expected that we would have to go to Rodney, about 9 miles below. Let's see. Alright, to find a landing. But the night a colored man came who informed me that the good landing would be found at Bruinsburg, a few miles above Rodney, from which point there was a good road leading to Port Gibson, some 12 miles in the interior. The information was found correct, and our landing was effected without opposition. Sherman had left his position above Vicksburg, yet in the morning of the 27th, I ordered him to create a diversion by moving his corps up the Yazoo and threatening an attack on Haines Bluff. My objective was to compel Pemberton to keep as much of the force about Vicksburg as I could until I could secure a good footing on high land east of the river. The move was extremely successful, and as was afterward learned, created great confusion about Vicksburg and doubts about our real design. Sherman moved the day of our attack on Grand Gulf on the 29th. Welcome HHHH 96C. I'm glad you could join us tonight. He disembarked his troops, apparently made every preparation to attack the enemy while the Navy bombarded the main forts at Haines Bluff. This move was made without a single casualty. Welcome, No Ferry. I'm glad you could join us. Welcome back, Carlson EOC. On the 1st of May, Sherman received orders from me to withdraw from the front of Haines Bluff and follow McPherson with 2 divisions as fast as he could. I had established a depot of supplies at Perkins Plantation. Now that all of our gunboats were below Grand Gulf, it was possible that the enemy might find our boats in the Big Black with improvised armament and attempt to destroy these supplies. McPherson was at hard times with a portion of his corps, and the depot was protected by part of his command. The night of the 29th, I directed him to arm one of the transports with artillery and send it up to Perkinson's plantation as a guard. Okay. I hope you have fun outside. And to those of the siege guns we had brought up along, moved there and put into position. The embarkation below Grand Gulf took place at Deschrons, Louisiana, 6 miles above Bruinsburg, Mississippi. Early on the morning of the 30th of April, McClellan's corps and 1 division of McPherson's corps were speedily landed. When this was effected, I felt a degree of relief, scarcely ever equaled since. Vicksburg was not yet taken, it is true, nor were its defenders demoralized by any of our previous moves. I was now in the enemy's country, with a vast river and a stronghold of Vicksburg between me and my base of supplies. But I was on dry ground, and on the same side of the river with the enemy. All the campaigns, labors, hardships, and expenditures from the month of December previous to this time had been made and endured, for This was one objective. Welcome TCH, I'm glad you could join us tonight. I had with me the 13th Corps, General McClellan commanding, and 2 brigadiers of Logan's division of the 17th Corps. General McPherson commanding, in all not more than 20,000 men to commence. Welcome Amanda, I'm glad you could join us tonight. The campaign with. These were soon reinforced by the remaining brigadier of Logan's division and Crocker's division of the 17th Corps. On the 7th of May, I was further reinforced by Sherman with 2 divisions of his, the 15th Corps. My force was then about 33,000 men. The enemy occupied the Grand Gulf, Hangs, Bluff, and Jackson with a force of nearly 60,000 men. Jackson is 50 miles east of Vicksburg, and it's connected with the railroad. My first problem was to capture Grand Gulf to use it as a base. The key to taking Grand Gulf was the capture of strategically located Port Gibson, 12 miles inland. Both the Grand Gulf garrison and the Grant's troops raced toward Port Gibson, clashing there, and the Union prevailed. During the night of May 2nd, the Confederates evacuated Grand Gulf. When I reached Grand Gulf, May 3rd, I had not been with my baggage since the 27th of April, and consequently I had no change of underclothing, no meal except that I could pick up sometimes at other headquarters, and no tent to cover me. The first thing I did was get a bath, borrow some fresh underclothing from one of the naval officers, and get a good meal on the flagship. Then I wrote letters to the general in command informing me, welcome to the live stream, of our present position, dispatchers to the telegraph from Cairo, orders to General Sullivan, commanding above Vicksburg, and gave orders to all my corps commanders. About 12 o'clock at night, I was through my work and started for Hacketson's Ferry, arriving there before daylight. While the Grand Gulf I had heard from Banks, who was on the Red River, and who said that he could not be at Port Hudson before the 10th of May, and then with only 15,000 men. Up until this time, my intention had been to secure Grand Gulf as a base of supplies, detach McClellan's corps to the Banks, and cooperate with him in the reduction of Port Hudson. Welcome Lionel Mise. I'm glad you could join us tonight. News from the Banks forced upon me a different plan of campaign from the one intended. To force his cooperation would have detained me at least a month. The reinforcements would not have reached 10,000 men after deducing casualties and necessary river guards at all high points close to the river for over 300 miles. The enemy would have strengthened his position and had been reinforced by more men than Banks could have brought. I therefore determined that, independently of Banks, cut loose from my base, destroy the rebel force near Vicksburg, and invest in the capture of the city. Grand Gulf was accordingly given as a base, and the authorities of Washington were notified. I knew well that Halleck's caution would lead him to disapprove of this course, but it was only that they gave me a chance of success. The time it would take to communicate with Washington and get a reply would be so great that I would not be interfered with until they demonstrated whether my plan was practicable. Even Sherman, who afterward ignored bases of supplies other than that were afforded by the country, while marching through the 4 states of the Confederacy with an army more than twice as large as mine at this time, wrote me from Hacketson's Ferry, advising me of the impossibility of supplying our army over a single road. He urged me to stop all troops till your army is partially supplied with wagons, and then act as quickly as possible, for this road would be jammed, as sure as life. To this I replied, I do not calculate upon the possibility of supplying the army with full rations from the Grand Gulf. I know it will be impossible without constructing additional roads. What I do expect is to get up what rations of hard bread, coffee, and salt we can, and make the country furnish the balance. Up to this point, our movement had been made without serious opposition. My line was now nearly parallel with that of Jackson and Vicksburg Railroad, and about 7 miles south of it. Welcome 117FO, welcome D. Lovely, Amari Blaine, and welcome Mimi Momo Waiting. I'm glad you guys could join us tonight for the live stream. We are looking at General Grant's memoirs, specifically the third chapter, which is on Vicksburg. We have quite a few pages to go, so bear with me. Welcome, Judy B. Alright. Started for Hackett's Ferry. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait. Nope, further ahead. There we go. Is that? Okay, there we are. In the south of it, the night was at Raymond, 18 miles from Jackson. McPherson, commanding Sherman, was at the center on the 14th Mile Creek. His advance thrown, the 10th mile. So we're talking about the section of the Civil War in Vicksburg, specifically the capture of Vicksburg. Alright. Sherman was at the center of the 14th Mile Creek, his advance thrown across, McClellan to the left. Welcome, Francis. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Alright. Where the enemy had concentrated a considerable force, and where the undoubtedly expected to attack us. McClellan's left was on the Big Black in all of our moves up to this time. The left had hugged the Big Black closely, and all the ferries had been guarded, to prevent the enemy throwing a force on our rear. McPherson encountered the enemy, 5,000 strong with 2 batteries, under General George, about 2 miles out of Raymond. This was about 2 p.m. Logan was in advance with one of the brigadiers. He deployed and moved up to engage the enemy. McPherson ordered the road in the rear to be cleared of wagons, and the balance of Logan's division and Crocker's, which was still farther in the rear, to command forward with all dispatch. The order was obeyed, and Autocracy, Logan, got his division in position for the attack with vigor, carried on the enemy's position, easily sending Gregg flying from the field, not to appear against our front. Welcome back, Carlson, and welcome La La La. Again until we met up in Jackson. This battle, McPherson lost 66 killed, 339 wounded, and 37 missing. Nearly or not quite all of Logan's divisions. The enemy loss was 100 killed, 305 wounded, besides the 415 taken prisoner. When the news reached me of McPherson's victory at Raymond, about sundown, my position with Sherman, I decided at once to turn the whole column toward Jackson and capture that place without delay. Pemberton was now on my left, with, as I supposed, about 18,000 men. In fact, I learned afterward, with nearly 50,000, a force was also collecting on my right, as Jackson, the point where all railroads communicating with Vicksburg connect. All the enemy's supplies of men and stores would come by that point. As I hoped in the end to besiege Vicksburg, I must first destroy all possibility of aid. I therefore determined to move swiftly toward Jackson, destroy or drive any force in that direction, and then turn upon Pemberton, but by moving against Jackson, I uncovered my own communication, so I finally decided to have none, to cut loose altogether from my base and move my whole force eastward. I then had no fears for my communication, and if I moved quickly enough, I could turn upon Pemberton before he could attack me on the rear. General Joseph V. Johnston arrived at Jackson in the night of the 13th from Tennessee, and immediately assumed command of all of the Confederates. Welcome HS, welcome CSY71, and welcome everyone else to the live stream. Alright, immediately assumed command of all Confederate troops in the Mississippi. I knew he was expecting reinforcements from the south and east. I notified General Halleck that I should attack the state capital on the 14th. A courier carried the dispatch of Grand Gulf through the unprotected country. Sherman, for the cause, and McPherson communicated with each other during the night and arranged to reach Jackson about the same hour. It rained in torrents during the night of the 13th and part of the day of the 14th. The roads were intolerable, and in some places on Sherman's line, where the land was low, there was covered more than a foot deep with water. But the troops never murmured. By 9 o'clock, Crocker of McPherson's troops was now in advance, came upon the enemy pickets, and speedily drove them upon the main body. Welcome, Zingman. I'm glad you could join us tonight. They were outside of the entrenchments in a strong position, and proved to be the troops that had been driven out of Raymond Johnson, had reinforced during the night by Georgia and South Carolina regiments, so that his force amounted to 11,000 men, and he expected still more. Yep. Sherman also came upon the rebel pickets some distance from our town, but speedily drove them in. He was now in the south and southwest of Jackson, contributing the Confederates behind their breastworks, while McPherson's right was nearly 2 miles north, occupying line running north and south across Vicksburg Railroad. Artillery was brought up and reconnaissance made preparation to an assault. McPherson brought up Logan's division while he developed Crocker's for the assault. Sherman made similar dispositions on the night. By 11 a.m., both were ready to attack. Slept that night in the room Johnston occupied the night before. On the night of the 13th, Johnston had sent the following dispatch to Pemberton at Edwards Station. I lately arrived and learned that Major General Sherman is between us with 4 divisions at Clinton. It is important to establish communication that you may be reinforced. If practicable, come up to the rear at once. To beat such detachment would be of immense value. All the troops you could quickly assemble should be brought. Time is all important. This dispatch was sent triplicate by different messengers. One of the messengers happened to be a loyal man who had been expelled from Memphis some months before by Hubert, by utterly disloyal and threatening sentiments. There was a good deal of parade about his expulsion, obscenely as a warning to those who entertained the sentiments he expressed. But Hubert and expelled man understood each other. He delivered a copy of Johnson's dispatch to McPherson, who forwarded this to me. Alright. Receiving this dispatch on the 14th, I ordered McPherson to move promptly in the morning back to Bolton, the near point where Johnson could reach the road. Bolton is about 20 miles west of Jackson. I also informed McClellan that his capture of Jackson and sent him to the following order. It is evident the design of the enemy to get north of us and cross the Big Black and beat into Vicksburg. We must not allow them. To do this, turn all of your forces toward Bolton Station and make all dispatch in getting there. Move troops by the most direct road from where they be recipient of this order. More troops by most made road where they may... Okay. Johnson stopped on the Canton Road with only 6 miles north of Jackson. The night of the 14th, he sent from there to Pemberton dispatches announcing the loss of Jackson in the following order. Nope, this is not the first... So this is a different Clinton. This is not Bill Clinton. This is General Clinton, or one of the Clinton commanders during the Civil War. And this is during Abraham Lincoln's presidency, the 15th President of the United States. Welcome, Jang Wong. I'm glad you could join us tonight for Vicksburg. We have actually a few more pages. We have a lot of... Vicksburg is actually a long section. Might turn into a two-parter. So, wait and see. Alright. As soon as the reinforcements are all up, there must be united to the rest of the army. I am anxious to see a force assembled. Let's see. Yeah, I'm reading a lot, and actually, this might be the... Actually, this is a pretty decent place to stop right here. We have 7 minutes left. So, I just happen to have a book on the Civil War, and it has a lot of passages. Let's look at some pictures for the last few minutes. We can finish Vicksburg Part 2 on tomorrow or so. In a day or so. I will find a book for tomorrow's live stream, and we'll continue this in a couple days. Right here is General William T. Sherman. William T. Sherman. He's probably the second... Yeah, this is Sherman. Young General Sherman. Most famous for Sherman's March later in the war. But at this point, he is working in the Western campaigns during the Civil War. And on a previous page, right here, these fancy people include General Sherman. Yeah, he does have a cold face. General Sherman with a few of the generals that were in the campaigns in Georgia, the Carolinas, long before anyone else was here. Yep, Sherman's March was in Georgia. And all these guys were basically part of the Georgia and Carolina campaign that pretty much got the Confederacy to surrender toward the end of the war. Right up here is, let's see, this is Joseph E. Johnson. Yeah, they are very nice uniforms. I actually do agree. This is Joseph E. Johnson. And this right here is W.T. Clark. He was a general on James McPherson's staff. Very much a carpet... he was considered a carpetbagger late after the Civil War. Or basically a war profiteer. Right here is Matthew Brady. A Matthew Brady photograph of General Grant. On the next page right here is John Logan. General John Logan of the U.S. Army. And just up here are a map of the theater in Vicksburg. It's actually difficult to see. Yeah, no, he has a nice mustache. Really nice mustache. This was a time in the military history where mustaches were in style. Welcome back, BBF. This is a General John A. Logan and his fellow officers. To the very top are some of the houses in Vicksburg, the town of Vicksburg. And right here, this is the artillery. This is basically artillery in Vicksburg, all pointed out from the fortifications down onto the river. Welcome Lao Ding to the live stream. We're taking the last 4 minutes to look at the pictures of said book. Right here, this is Flag Officer David Dixon's Porter's Mississippi Squadron during a run past the big guns of the Vicksburg batteries. I have not seen these places in person. The only place I've been to that's relevant to the Civil War is Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. And that's about it. Just down below here is David Dixon Porter. He's got a nice military uniform, nice long coat with the double buttons. Just over here are river steamers unloading supplies at Young's Point above Vicksburg in March 1863. I guess Alabama was kind of one of the states that did not surrender, so. But technically every state was under military occupation after the war, regardless of whether they surrendered or not. So it doesn't matter too much in the long run. This is General G.W. Morgan. He's got a nice beard. Look at that fancy beard. So I'm going to show you the book real quick. This is what it's called, The Civil War. The definite reference, including a chronology of events, an encyclopedia, and the memoirs of Grant and Lee, by Philip Shaw Paulden and John S. Bowman. Up here is Union General Francis Blair and staff. Francis Blair is this guy in the middle. He's got this nice long beard. Once again, this is a time in the Army when beards were the thing. Just over here is central Vicksburg. A nice little town, dirt road, quite peaceful. On the previous page right here, this is the Siege of Vicksburg map along the Mississippi River. Vicksburg is right here, and the Mississippi River kind of runs like this. Kind of bows this way during that time. Just right here is a view of Vicksburg toward the Harpin Bend of the river. The Harpin Bend of the river is like right here, so. This is a view of Vicksburg from the Mississippi River, the bluff rising behind a riverfront. And right here this is Union General John A. McClellan. He's got the nicest beard in this book. Almost looks like Rasputin with that beard. And just up here is General John C. Pemberton from the Confederacy. Welcome, Mr. Bob. Look at this fabulous artillery right here. The size of this artillery is pretty big, but not as big as some of the mortars that we will later run into in this book. We saw General Grant. He's in this section, but let's see. This is Earl Van Dorn. He was a Confederate general. Right here is, or wait. No, this is Van Dorn, and this is David Glasgow. And this is just a Union battery repelling an attack. Yeah, this is a really nice book. Right here is President Lincoln with his members of cabinet. Just over here is an encampment of the Union Army outside Corinth. And just up here is the Battle of Corinth, fought from October 3rd to the 4th of 1862. We will continue reading this book a couple days later or tomorrow, depending on if I find another book to look into. So for the time being, have a good lunch, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. And to all the YouTube commenters who commented or found my video in one way or another, this was part 1 of Vicksburg. Tomorrow is part 2, and I hope you all enjoy your night.